Okay, so we'll make a start. Hi, my name's Tim Daley and I'm from Perago. And what we're going to talk about in this session is an overview of the challenges and opportunities faced around recruiting talent for digital across Wales, and what's particularly interesting about Wales and about being part of an SME and supporting the growth of talent across Wales. We've got some of my colleagues with me today. So we've got Sunmi, Ben and Jess, who will also talk a little bit about their skills and experiences and their journeys through this. We'll cover off some Q&A at the beginning, and then we'll leave some space for any questions anyone's got about particular areas that they might want to talk about. So just to give you a little introduction, Perago is a SME. So we're a small company with people in the company now from all four corners of Wales. We specialise in digital service delivery and digital in the round of that. So we're not an IT company in that respect. We cover off technology, but it's only a part of the whole digital picture. We're supporting a number of opportunities for digital delivery right across Wales at the minute. So we're working across local government, across central government, doing some work in the private sector and third sector as well. So we have a great view across the landscape of Wales and how digital is working at the moment. Just a bit of background in terms of skills and talent in my own background. So I went to university as lots of people do, to do English and history, and you end up thinking, well, how on earth am I going to turn that into a career at some point in the future? And I spent a long time after that to join the civil service, and worked for a long time in the civil service, in the Department for Transport, and basically found my way in through operational delivery and then into change. So became heavily engaged in project management and focused a lot on IT projects, but not necessarily just IT projects. So I specialize in, I'm a great believer in change is change. There isn't a difference between IT change and other kinds. You might have some domain knowledge that becomes helpful, but really it's about how to deliver outcomes for people. And as things moved on, picked up a lot of good training, a lot of skills and experience. But I found my way into more agile with a small a, and discovered, that was the place for me. That was what I really wanted to do, and that was the stuff that was really different about change, was doing digital services, using agile methodologies, and importantly putting the user at the center. So we'll talk a little bit about that and how that shapes what Perago is all about, right across all of us as we speak through our career. You'll see that the user is where we're really focused on better outcomes for citizens in Wales. So first up, I'll introduce Sunmi. So Sumi's been with us for about a year now as a placement from Swansea University. So Sumi's going to tell us a little bit about how she came about joining us, about that placement year with Perago. And how she kind of got into that and how that relates to sort of career path and stuff. So Sunmi, can you talk a little bit about how you came to find Perago and what drew you to this role?
Yeah, so like Tim said, I'm a student at Swansea University. I study economics and business, and this is like my year in industry. So in terms of how I came across Perago, I think it was advertised through our uni as like a placement year, and it, basically just to go on and check who Perago was and then apply if you thought that was something that you'd like to do. Yes, I did. And I've been with Perago for nearly a year now, and yeah, I've learned so much with them. I've been involved in different projects and just gained so much more knowledge. I think right at the start of my placement, someone, I can't remember who, but someone told me to have a look at the digital service standards on gov.uk. So I did, And that was just full of information, and it was really helpful, and it definitely helped me understand more of what Perago were doing as a company in this space. Throughout the year, I've been working with Perago and the Centre for Digital Public Services Wales, and I was able to sit in some discoveries and some alphas, and I've just been able to see how each project has progressed, and how the service standards have actually been implemented in each different project. Yeah, this year has definitely exposed me to the world of digital, and I've gained so much more knowledge and insight throughout the year. So, I'm glad that I stumbled across Perago.
How was it? How was it in terms of your expectations coming from a degree that's not specifically about digital, and how you've managed to relate that to what you're studying?
Yeah, I think it's great actually, because when you're at uni or when you're studying, it is more of the theories, and at the beginning of the placement, like I said, I read over what digital was, and looking at the service standards is really helpful. And it's actually great just to see how all these different terms and these phrases that I've learned are actually being used in a practical way. I've been able to get involved in some user research and sit in some show and tells, and as you can imagine, all of that was brand new to me. But I've definitely enjoyed working in digital, and it's been great to see how the work Perago have been doing has actually really helped others, especially in Wales. There's so much potential here, and the work that everyone's been doing is just been fantastic. Yeah, I think before starting with Perago, I wasn't entirely sure what digital was, or what exactly Perago did in that space. So I wasn't like entirely sure what to expect. But going through their website, reading and seeing all the different services they were offering, and the work that they were doing, I knew it was something that I would definitely enjoy or be interested in. I think I've already started to implement some of these techniques in my thinking. For example, I now think about the user needs, when making a decision, or why agile ways of working is actually so effective, especially nowadays. But yeah, I've definitely learned a lot, and if anything, we've probably exceeded any expectations I had. So yeah.
How do you think it might change your next steps as you go back into finish your university course and think about what you do next?
I think having worked in the digital space now, I can say that I've been introduced to something that I would genuinely want to do in the future. My next step is probably to finish my degree. But after that, I'd probably, I'd definitely be interested in working in this industry again. Being introduced to so many different job roles and so many different skill sets within the industry, from service designers, delivery managers, user researchers, any comms roles, that kind of thing. I think it's great that Perago have actually been able to provide the opportunity for early talent, just to have some kind of insight into the industry, because I honestly don't think I would have gotten into this any other way. So it's been great to have some awareness of what's available, and what kind of skills I can bring and skills that I can learn for the future.
Yeah, it's been mutual in that respect, in terms of us having the responsibility as well, if you like, for bringing people into digital, and it challenging us to, something that we think we talk about it all day, every day. But I'm not explaining it to somebody who doesn't know what it is, and bringing them through, and then utilizing those skills that they've got, and saying, well, actually, those skills are still relevant to do these things.
Exactly.
And it's been a great to have that kind of challenge within the team as well, and it's extended now. We've recently just helped one of the local authorities we're working with to recruit an apprentice who will be working with our team in a similar way that you have, in terms of picking up that broad range of skills and starting to work out what specialisms they might become interested in. But it's just you don't just say, I know what I want to be, it just doesn't work like that. So it's been brilliant. Thanks for that. Just moving on now to Jess. So Jess, do you want to just give a little background of how you got into digital? your sort of journey so far?
Yeah, sure. So I did a psychology degree because at the time I thought, well, I like learning about people and thinking about how people behave and think and making things better for people. So that seemed like the right kind of degree for me to do. And I kind of thought that would probably manifest itself in a career as like a clinical psychologist or a social worker or something like that. But my career path actually kind of got pivoted by when one of my final year modules to do with environmental psychology, I came across some recycling bins, which is a bit of a weird thing to change my career path. But we were looking at how they'd been designed with what we call affordances, which is where the design of something shows you how to interact with it. So in this case, the holes in the bin showed you what you should put in them. So if it was circular, it was for cans. If it was flat, it was for paper. And that really kind of shifted psychology for me from being theory based and then trying to apply theory to the real world to actually being used to design things and applied to solve problems. So that's what kind of first got me onto the area that I work in now, which is user-centered design. So user-centered design is all about learning about people to design products and services better. So instead of going and like helping people through a career as like a social worker, say, it's now my job's much more about designing that whole service and that whole system they interact with. So at that point, when I thought, okay, that's a really interesting area, I probably could have gone down a more human factors route, which is more about designing physical products like a medical device. But when I graduated around 2015, GDS, the Government Digital Service, were making quite a lot of noise about user-centered design and digital government. And that kind of whole narrative and what was going on there really appealed to me. So unfortunately, entry-level jobs in user-centered design in government, especially in South Wales, wasn't really a thing. And I didn't really want to move to London, not that there was a huge amount more opportunity in London. So the first job I actually took was on a software development graduate scheme at Companies House in Cardiff. So yeah, that was my kind of entry point into a digital role.
What sort of benefits do you think in that sort of early career part of doing some hands-on technical work supporting you in that sort of user-centered design thinking?
Yeah, I mean, it was really useful. At the time, I remember being really frustrated, like that I was working as a developer rather than in design and like being a bit impatient. But in hindsight, I don't know why I was in such a rush because like that experience was really valuable, like in understanding kind of how to work with developers, understanding technical constraints, learning a lot about agile software development, which you will learn as part of like being a user-centered designer anyway, but being part of it through as a developer, I think gives you a really quite deep insight into how software development works. And even more practical things I still use with like my current job, like being able to create prototypes in code is really useful, being able to understand kind of accessibility from a front end development point of view. Yeah, all of that sort of stuff is really valuable.
Can you tell us a bit about your experiences on the sort of DDAT fast stream then, in terms of, developing skills and talent? Those are, great schemes for people to get into, but what was your particular experience of that?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, one of my kind of career moves was then to join, as you said, Tim, the Digital Data and Technology Civil Service Fast Stream. So this, for anyone who doesn't know, is a leadership development program, and it's run through the Cabinet Office in conjunction with GDS. And you work across different central government departments and different digital roles. And because user-centered design, which is the area that I'm interested in, it is a specialism, but it's also made up of a range of quite distinct roles, from things like user research, interaction design, service design, content design, and even like adjacent roles like product management, delivery management. I thought getting that breadth of experience would be really valuable, and of course as well working across different departments and getting that leadership development. So the time I spent on it was valuable, but I didn't stay on it very long. And I decided to leave after only like just under a year. And there's lots of kind of reasons that there was for that, but one of them was the lack of opportunities in Wales. Like most of those placements and most of the good placements in digital were in London. And I didn't really want to live in London. I didn't really want to compromise on the quality of the experience I was getting to do it in Wales. So I decided to kind of pick my own jobs going forward, and then I moved then to go to work for the Office for National Statistics.
So at some point then you decided to leave the civil service altogether, and move out of there. How have you found that experience, and the difference between, you know, sort of how you've been able to develop your skills and capabilities in a different way?
Yeah, so I was at the ONS for about 14, 15 months or something, and then I left to join a product and service design consultancy before joining Perago. So some of the reasons I did that was to work in a bit of a different environment, so something which is a bit more fast-paced and a bit more of a variety of different projects as well. Because obviously working in-house, you get really deep knowledge in like one service area, but working for a consultancy, you're coming across lots of different types of service and types of client, which really kind of was a good opportunity to expand what I was doing. And another kind of key reason I think is to work with people with like real expertise in user-centered design. I realize that sounds horrible for everyone that I've worked with in the past, but what I mean is, yeah, in a consultancy, it kind of, yeah, hires really skilled and experienced people, which it can be difficult to find those sorts of people working in-house to learn from. So that was another reason that I decided to leave.
And how have you found the experience of being on the sort of the outside of it, if you like, and working back into it? How have you found that in terms of testing your skills and capabilities?
Yeah, I think all the things I said were reasons that I left are true, and those things were like valid. I think some of the harder things have been, it can be a bit harder to influence from the outside. Like as a service designer, it's a very like relationship buildy type role, and I find it sometimes a bit harder to like get in there. You can't just like find someone's email in Outlook and email them. You have to try and kind of do stuff through other people, which can be a bit harder. Sometimes you're less in the details, and if you're like on a short-term piece of work or whatever, then you can't get like proper into the weeds, which I like doing. And another thing which I don't like as much is if you're not seeing work through to like seeing like a change being implemented. If you do a lot of discovery work in a consultancy, then yeah, I personally like to stay on and see, you know, that change happen, see it through like different ideas being prototyped and something being delivered at the end of it, which is not always possible. But not that that always happens in-house anyway.
No, we'll come back a bit later to talk about some of those issues you mentioned there about opportunities in Wales and you know, what's the right approach for building talent within the Welsh Public Services. But thanks for that. Ben, so you've come at this from a slightly different angle. So you're leading on tech in Perago. So you've come at it from a different aspect than Jess and Sunmi. Do you want to give us a quick overview of your sort of how you've come at it and where your sort of development and career path has come?
Yes, so 20 years ago, I was studying philosophy in Swansea, and as I graduated from that with a not amazing degree, I'm not going to lie, Kant was a little beyond me. I realized there wasn't much money involved in kind of contemplating the deeper truths of the universe. And so it was maybe time to retrain in something that I could earn an income with. And I was able to do a postgraduate conversion course to computer science, which allowed me to move into programming. And this was a little ahead of year 2000. Everyone was saying, get into computers. Everyone's spending a lot on year 2000. By the time I actually finished the case, of course, it was the year 2000. No one was spending more money on it. It was fine. But I went into working first with the City and County of Swansea, and then I moved back to England for a while and worked at some agencies doing design and development and various software companies over the last couple of decades as a developer in various roles, into the last 10 years where I was really working for myself as a contractor and selling my skills. And I enjoyed that. I enjoy working for myself. I enjoy being able to solve problems for people and to be able to develop solutions or to be part of a team working in those environments. And it also means that I've spent a lot of time working with a lot of different platforms, programming environments, programming languages. So I'm a very good generalist by this point. I can work with a lot of tools. If there's something in front of me, I can probably figure out how to get it working. And that's quite useful moving over into this role, because you don't know what you're going to be dealing with each new customer or client until you're actually in place with them. And so when the opportunity to work for Perago came up, I felt that was a really interesting next step for me, having moved back to Wales a few years ago.
How would you find, in terms of skills, how have you managed to keep, things are moving so fast. How do you keep up to date? And that's always a challenge, particularly within organizations, to know what you've got as an existing set of technologies, for example. But how do you keep up to date with the changes and innovations?
A big part of this, there are always going to be 100 different new products coming to market, new languages, new platforms being developed, and they're always really interesting. And it's often fun to experiment with them, see what they do. But also 96% of them are going to not last a very long time. So there's a balance to be struck between keeping an inquiring mind, looking at these tools and these platforms as they become available, but also being ready to try and keep an eye on what's actually going to last. And in most organizations, you want to have good tools, but you also want tools that you can recruit people to use. And the more obscure and new and offbeat a tool is, even if it does match a good niche, it can be harder to find people. It can be harder to support it long term. So there's really a balance to be struck in that regard, I think.
Do you think that's one of the biggest differences between traditional computing, IT, and digital, is the pace of the tools and the pace of change, and how to stay relevant?
I think there's definitely something that we need to pay attention to there. And there are, the last few years, we've seen huge developments in machine learning and big data tooling. And that's stuff that can do amazing things, but most people outside of academic or huge organizations like Microsoft or IBM haven't really had access to it. But that's going to come in the next few years, and we're going to be able to do excellent stuff that no one could do before. So we've got to be both aware of it, and it's like you've got to give yourself time to play with these tools so you know when you can use them seriously. I think there's a lot of value in that.
And you mentioned there, big data and use of data and analytics and things. What's your experience of using those to improve services and outcomes for citizens, and particularly then from a talent perspective? How do you do that, and how do you implement those things and get those skills in order to be able to do those kind of new jobs?
Yeah, there are whole new realms of data science that are really coming in, and there are people graduating in those fields. But generally, those tools are a mixture of statistical tools and database data storing, querying, and collation tools that a lot of people who are coming through different sciences will have studied to some degree. Because there's so much statistical analysis involved in that. So actually, I think there's a lot of space there for bringing in for looking for people who are graduating. Recent graduates with science skills will have the basic grounding in statistics, because ultimately the thing you need may be not exactly what anyone else is doing already. So in a recent project we've been looking at how analyzing a series of calls and trying to identify, is this the same person calling back because their needs haven't been met or not, and using some fairly, just starting from the data we had in Excel and just pulling it into a database and running it through a set of different collations has allowed us to do some analysis which tells us as much as the data can about about whether those are more likely to be repeats or not. But of course, the data only goes so far, which is why you also need people who are good at bringing in new data, who are good at deciding what you should be surveying, what you should be collecting. And that is another discipline that is, again, that's really Jess's field as well. You know, there's identifying the data so you can use it, and knowing how to use it are almost two different things already.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting, and I guess a question for everyone on this one is that what we've just heard now, and when we were talking about this session, the four of us in this call, none of us specifically did digital degrees or you know, that kind of stuff, you know, in terms of how things are being developed, but we've all made our way into this space and brought those broader skills to bear. How important do you think it might be to, you know, there's lots of stuff around developing training courses and academia around digital skills. How important do you think is the balance between that broader experience and hands-on learning as opposed to the academic path?
Yeah, so I've got a lot of time for hands-on learning. You know, the computer science course I did began with a 2-week cramming session on the basics of how to program. And once we got that, we were expected to be able to follow the undergrad courses and some of the other more advanced courses. And actually we could. And there's like foundational knowledge that you need. But once you've got that more basic stuff, you learn so much by doing. And if you have good people willing to mentor, actually working in more of an apprenticeship type role can make a huge difference to the work you can do, and actually can, like, a good mentor who is able to guide you but doesn't give you everything on a plate can really help jump your skills forward, I think. And I do think there's a lot of space for that apprenticeship type approach, particularly in my technical side of things. I think there's a lot of room for it.
Jess, how have you found that experience in terms of when you've sat on both sides of the fence, as it were?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult thinking about, is a degree really necessary for the role I do? Like, I think the degree I did definitely has helped, like through really good understanding of like research methods, behavior, data analysis, analytical and critical thinking. But like that wasn't necessarily a kind of path into doing this job, and I'm pretty sure you could be a really good user-centered designer without having gone through that process. I think it can be really hard to learn on the job in these roles where if there's not enough of those kind of experienced mentors that Ben was talking about. Like, user-centered design has been an emerging field that a lot of organizations are investing in recruiting senior practitioners, but not always. So a lot of the time you're kind of just like trying to forge your own path. Like, I've found that as I've been trying to upskill myself over the years, that often you're doing something for the first time or something you've learned a little bit about, but you're also still the most experienced person in your team working on it. So yeah, it's really just a case of learning by doing, and reaching out to like external places to get that support, whether that's like blogs, meetups, Twitter, like courses that are available to do.
Communities are really important to me, and the spirit. The thing about digital that I found in any other part of having like, lengthy experience of doing IT projects and things, there was much more of a, I know about this thing and I must maintain my seniority in this field, whereas digital feels much more like an open book. People are much happier to share than they seem to have been when I was doing some of the older database and proprietary software tools that were of years ago, and now it seems much more of a democratized place for people to share. So that's a big part of building that in, and we specialize in doing that, and we work really hard to make sure that people we work with understand that we will do skills transfer, and that we will help people do those kind of things. I think one of the areas you mentioned earlier around entry-level roles, I think, Sunmi, it'd be interesting to get a view on when you talk about that, when we mention that entry level, the amount of entry-level jobs, just from your experience over the last 12 months, just how you would perhaps think about encouraging people into a field that maybe they hadn't thought about before.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think in terms of like entry level roles, there are like loads of different aspects in digital, like I said earlier. So I think if people were actually aware of, of what kind of roles were available and what skills that they could actually use, then I think that would be really helpful. I think things like an apprenticeship are really good because you're actually working on the job and learning as well as you go. And I think it's one of those experiences that you wouldn't know that you were good at it unless you were, thrown into it, kind of thing. So I think doing stuff like apprenticeships and a placement year, or even just reading up on what digital is and where you think you can fit in, I think that'd be really good in terms of like an entry level position, because there's always a chance to move around, you know what I mean? And you're always constantly working with other different people and other different kind of skill sets on the team. So I think just getting in there and actually experiencing what to do, I think that's great in terms of getting into it.
Yeah, one thing that's been mentioned quite a bit, I think everybody's mentioned a bit, is that DDAT, being, I still think in when you think of other, things like operational delivery and HR, finance roles and things, DDAT is still developing and emerging as a field, as it were, and new roles being added to it all the time, and people are trying very hard to put structure around it, which is great. It'd be interesting to get some of your thoughts on the role of that DDAT and this. What I see quite a bit of people trying to be quite specific in DDAT, and trying to say, well, I'm this role and I do this thing, which is taking us a bit, feels like we're going back towards kind of ITIL type functions and things where we're quite specific. Whereas it feels like what's coming out quite strongly in this conversation is actually a bit of freedom in terms of finding out what you're good at and what you enjoy doing is equally important for keeping people in the roles. I don't know what your experience is of that kind of DDAT. There's loads of great training out there. There's loads of great stuff. What your experiences of doing some of that were, and what are the pros and cons you've seen?
Yeah, I think in terms of DDAT, for me, like personally, I probably learn better on the job, like, if that makes sense. Like I'm more of like an experienced person rather than learning and reading kind of person. It's that, but I think like you said, when you have all these different roles, I think getting in there and actually seeing what you're good at and actually how you can bring out some skills that you didn't actually think you had, I think that's really important, because then you can get in there and you can actually do different sort of things, you know, things that I didn't expect at all to be doing this year, I've actually done. And it's, you know, I wouldn't have known that without actually experiencing that. So I don't know, I think, you know, having kind of an open mind, or having that kind of openness and learning from others is really important in this space, I feel. Because otherwise, you know, if you're like stuck on one thing, then maybe you won't be as approachable or available to other different roles and other different skills that you could have done, and you could have improved on as well.
Yeah, it's really important to have that, you know, as we look to build multidisciplinary teams, for people to have an appreciation of the other things that people do, and it's that constant discussion then about depth of knowledge versus breadth of knowledge, isn't there? And that experience. I don't know, Jess, is there anything particular you've found in your sort of experience of that DDAT, and in particular the kinds of training and development that's available?
Yes, I think my experience working in central government is that the way that digital jobs have been applied is that they are quite specialised. Like user-centred design in itself is a specialism, but there's quite a broad range of skills that sit within it. And then the DDAT framework in central government says that you have people that are an interaction designer and in that interaction design path, and you have people who are user researchers and they're in that path. Whereas in other smaller organisations or in not central government, you might have people that are more generalist across different skills. And I think there's good arguments for having specialists and having more generalists, depending on the type of organisation, the size of the project, the kind of like maturity of digital. I think if you're just starting out, it's probably better to have someone that is more generalist and can do different things. But if it's a really big project, really important piece of work, then you probably do want to have people who are really excellent at just the kind of one area that they focus on. And like training wise, I think in central government as well, you'll go down one path, and it could be I guess a negative of it, that you would be rewarded. If you're an interaction designer, you're going to be rewarded for doing interaction design work, but you're not necessarily going to be rewarded and promoted for like great service design work. And kind of, how is that a good thing? How does that fit together?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's definitely moving, and we see it all the time, the people we work with, that it's certainly vexing people how to recruit, how to develop, how to retain staff members. And you know, from a Perago perspective, it's been really brilliant to find some people like yourselves and the rest of the team who can be part of what we're doing. But it's really tough to find people who are prepared to step out of those environments as well, where they're nice and safe, and there's a straight, you know, career path, and people work out and say, well, in 20 years time I could be, you know, have my own office or whatever. That mentality is very, very stuck in the public sector in Wales that we see. So you know, it's an interesting challenge for us, and we know that that is shared right across all the clients we work with. They're all struggling to find and get people to be in Wales, and there's a big challenge to get academia to turn out people who can do the jobs. So it is a big challenge, but I think, you know, we are certainly seeing people rise to that challenge, you know, and we are trying to be part of that as well, and we're seeing that people are definitely, you know, relating to what we're trying to do, and we're trying to support, as I said, that local authority we're working with, who've gone and got a digital apprentice, call them a digital apprentice, because it's giving them that broad span rather than calling them an apprentice, you know, a UCD design apprentice or whatever. They've got the breadth to develop in that role, and that's what we're trying to support and encourage right across the piece as well. Are there any questions from anybody on any of the things we've talked about, or things we haven't talked about that you'd like to pick any of our brains on out there?
There's no questions come through the chat, but we still welcome questions. Just put them in the Q&A and we can pick those up. But there are a couple that we had from people before the event that we wouldn't mind discussing, if you don't mind. one of the questions was why work at somewhere, not necessarily Perago, but a company like Perago rather than the public sector? What kind of benefits could people get from that?
Speaking for myself and why I left the public sector and set out on this road is the sheer variety of how we can apply our skills and determination to solve real problems. There's absolutely nothing wrong with people doing that, and if they're wedded to a specific vocational thing. I used to work at DVLA, for example, but it's very limited in the things that it does. So all the jobs exist there, but the subject matter stays the same. And for me, it was that variety of things to be able to say, right, how do I get involved? And we've been involved in working, as we said, from everything from adult social care, water, utility companies, audit Wales, waste services in local authorities, democratic services, so the variety is enormous. And then to be able to apply our skills and passion to those things that feel a bit more real sometimes than being in a narrow sort of public sector box. And I know that was always something that I fought quite hard when I was in the public sector, to try and say, how do we move around a bit more? And there is a bit of that. And like Jess has said, the fast stream stuff is one area where you get to experience different things, but there's nothing quite as fast moving as what where we work, in terms of what you do from 1 month to the next. So that was the big challenge for me, and the big sort of desire to have that variety of stuff.
Okay, great. Perhaps a question that we should have maybe asked at the start, but before any of the other stuff that we've been talking about digital, what does digital actually mean in this context?
So there are a number of sort of accepted definitions these days, but for us, digital means basically harnessing the power of the internet. So anything that is enabled by that kind of internet technology. So it leads you into the opportunity, as Ben talked about, joining up pieces of information, joining up experiences, joining up the kind of skills and capabilities of people across the piece. So exploiting ever-changing technologies, and all of the stuff that it takes around that to make that happen. So if you want to be responsive, if you want to move at the pace that the internet is moving, then you have to change the way you work. The old traditional methods of I think like Ben said, go to university and learn 4 years of a particular coding language and come out and it's gone. It's moved on. Or go in and learn about solving a particular issue. By the time you do it in any depth, the problem's moved to somewhere else. So it's about that, how users use that technology to do things in a totally different way, and expanding their experiences as a result of that. I don't know if anybody else has got any bits in particular they think to add to that.
Yes, I think one of the things that's important about what we're doing here is because the environment is shifting so fast, what we are needing to work with is not as much necessarily about as knowledge, not dealing as much with knowledge about a specific topic as knowledge about the structure of how to interact with it. So it's almost like a secondary level of knowledge that we're working with that allows us to be flexible as the ground changes underfoot without being pulled away with those changes.
Okay, excellent. I think following on quite nicely from that, then what we're saying is quite a variety of skills involved in the, in delivering a decent kind of digital kind of service then. But if people were thinking that that's what they want to do now, I know in Wales, I heard the other day that we're doing a GCSE now on WAGC in digital specifically. I'm not aware that there's a specific university kind of course on that. So what kind of courses do we think, if people wanted to get into digital, would give them a really solid grounding to build from? Do we think?
That's a really interesting question, isn't it?
It's probably multiples is the truth, isn't it? But there's probably a selection of 4 or 5 and you can start from different aspects.
There's quite a few topics that it seems to me like something that involves mathematical and statistical methods will be useful for pretty much anyone, which a lot of sciences do. My background in computer science means that I've got a good idea of how networks and computers work, but a lot of that goes into a degree of depth which isn't relevant for the type of work we're doing now. So that type of analysis, but most subjects are going to go into more depth and maybe not as much width, as there's a difference between depth first and breadth first knowledge. And I think a lot of times what you need for digital is to have wide knowledge and the ability to go deep once you know where you need to go deep. And so also looking at maybe joint degrees are probably quite a good option in terms of academic qualifications. I'm sure everyone else will have useful things to say on this.
I saw an amazing degree course that I think just started this year in London. I can't remember what it's called, which is annoying, but it's like a course all about multidisciplinary problem solving, so that you get set some kind of challenge to like climate change or something, and then you learn loads of different techniques to understanding a problem through research and loads of different disciplines to like try and solve that problem. And that's definitely the degree I would do if I was choosing again. I think it is only in London, but maybe that sort of thing could spread.
I think you're right. I think there is some stuff, and we've been, talking with some of the Welsh universities through our work with the Centre for Digital Public Services and some of the apprentice courses as well, to be able to match it, because of course you do, depending on what you do need, so for example, you're going to need, if you're going to do web design work, you still need to know how to do web design work. You still need to know how to write code. Those things you'll have to have them if you work in those specific areas. But what we are seeing is people wrapping around the other stuff. So starting to have a wider appreciation of things like the design and data capabilities that are added to those technical capabilities, rather than just saying, well, I can write code. Well, you can write code, but how much use are you to the rest of the team to be able, if you can't apply it to something? So having that broader skill set rather than just having the technical capability. And that's one of the big challenges we're seeing with organizations, certainly in Wales, where everybody seems to work on proprietary bought vendor software. So they learn how to do, SQL, or they learn how to do some Oracle databases and things. And so they know how to do that thing, but they don't know how to then apply it to a modern problem. So if someone, we see stuff around, traditional things, like say, as a consumer, I want my problem. If I email you or I contact you on your web service, I expect an answer pretty instantaneously these days. Whereas they're still working on systems and a mindset that says, how do I turn that around on overnight batches and all this kind of stuff? Because they say, well, I know how to run batches and I know how to thread databases and all that kind of stuff. But what I don't know how to do is to now adopt the new technology and apply it to modern responsive problems. And I think that's one of the things we're seeing quite a lot now, is people are putting that wrapper around it. And I think the additional part of it, which is Sunmi is a great example of it, is then spending enough time in that course to be able to go and say, how is this really applied? With enough time for you to end in the second or half of your course to be able to say, actually, I think I know how this works now. And I think that's a big part of it, is being able to get enough real life experience into these things. And we you know, said we've spoken to universities who are trying they're desperate for things to work on. They're desperate for real problems to be able to show students how to learn something. And then that should go into, you know, those kind of graduate apprenticeships and things to say, right, how do I get my hands dirty now, and how do I continue to learn? Because that's the big difference, is it becomes a continual learning process. You can't say I've learned, you know, COBOL or whatever it used to be, and then I'm a COBOL developer for the next 20 years. That's not how it works anymore. So it's much more about how do you transition from that classroom training into real experience.
I think it kind of depends as well, though. Like, if you know that you have a particular interest, like, for example, my boyfriend's a software developer and that's what he wants to do. So if you do know that, then doing specific software development training is fine. Like, I don't think he'd be interested in that multidisciplinary problem solving degree that I just mentioned. But if it's more just like broad digital stuff, then something more generalist probably is suitable.
And how to apply those software skills, isn't it? So it's enough that becomes relevant, isn't it? And you become useful, if you like, when you're in the market then as quickly as possible in the job market, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. We haven't got any more questions in, and I'm just looking at time and can see a couple of people are starting to leave. So I don't know if you want to round up, Tim.
No, that's fine. That's all from us. And, you know, thanks for listening, and thanks to Sunmi, Jess and Ben for sharing as well. And if anybody wanted to know anything more about what we do, just get in touch with us. You can go to the website or get on our contact details. If you wanted to learn a bit more about what we're doing across Wales, or if you want to work with us, either side, in or outside. Thanks everybody for coming along.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.